I've heard it said that once you know somebody's ideology, you no longer need to have a conversation with them because you already know where they stand on things. Identity can be something similar, but it's in fact far more insidious and more constricting. This channel is Meditation Amsterdam. My name is Pablo, and today I want to pick up on a thread that we started to create this week about empathy, codependence, and the danger or the insidious problem of identity to resolve the codependence situation that some people might be facing. Now, in order to understand the problem of identity and why identity, whether it is that of an empath or some other identity, is a fundamental problem, you have to imagine that going through life with an identity is like trying to negotiate a very hilly, windy, and unpredictable road while driving your car in a single gear. You can imagine how inconvenient that would be, how much more friction you would be having that's necessary at some point, how much more lack of control you'll be experiencing at some point. Your inability to accelerate the way you want, your inability to brake and compress the way you want. There's very little adaptability to a road that is utterly unpredictable. So this is a good analogy when it comes to identity in life. Life is the windiest, most unpredictable road that you can imagine. And what an identity does is, out of the indoctrination, out of the mores, out of the behavioral patterns and opinions and emotional reactions that you want to preserve, your band of operation is incredibly narrow. So you have taken all the possible responses that life requires, and you have constricted yourself to trying to negotiate life with only a very handful of very narrow responses. And therefore, identity as a fundamental way to go through life is incredibly problematic. Now, it's safe to say that all of us start off without any identity when we're born, and then we start to form an identity through indeed our formative years until we have an identity which hopefully is, let's say, call it good enough or functional enough so that we can interact with our environment, achieve our goals and things of that kind. Now, maybe the identity is very functional and maybe the identity is dysfunctional. I've made other videos in which I claim that even a highly functioning identity is still fundamentally codependent. And the reason is that the codependence is one that is fundamental to our core wound. That in fact, identity and personality are nothing other than the face of our core wound. And that so long as that wound is there, and so long as our identity and personality are our main form of expression, then we are fundamentally codependent, because identity and personality are there to do nothing other than to try to arrange our environment in a way that makes us feel good and try to procure validation from that environment, whether it's physical validation, which is of course necessary, but also emotional validation. So identity as such is a very clunky way to go, and you can immediately see how acquiring the identity of an empath is going to be the very thing that prevents you from transcending your codependence. Now, the identity of an empath is going to have a large amount of appeal, especially if you do have highly empathic traits, because on the one hand, it confirms something that you kind of suspected or felt about yourself all along. You know that you are more sensitive than others, that you can perceive more, that you are more touched by the environment and by the things that people do. And at the same time, you can read situations better. So it's going to validate or confirm a kind of trait that you already knew about yourself. And then suddenly somebody comes and tells you, oh, you're an empath. If you are like that, you go like, oh my God, this is exactly what I've been sort of kind of suspecting all along. And and then immediately you identify with those traits as something that is fundamental to you. And then, of course, whenever you identify with a certain personality, in this case that of an empath, then it also explains or creates a polarity or a dyad in which you, as the good empath, have been abused by or are in contention with the evil narcissist, right? So now you have that duality immediately, because in order to identify with something or be a personality, there needs to be something against which you compare yourself. Now, so now you have yourself a problematic situation, because to the degree that you cling on the identity of an empath, that identity will generate its opposite by its very definition, and you are trapped in that problem essentially forever unless you let go of this. There is a more fundamental way, or rather a more fundamental reason why we cling to identity, whether it is a helpful one or an unhelpful one. In the case of an empath, I think it is a generally unhelpful identity, because it keeps you entangled with your opposite, which is the narcissist. But in general, an identity provides you not just with a payoff in terms of making you feel special or giving you this counterpart with whom you're contending. It also gives you something far more pacifying and far more insidious and far more difficult to disentangle from. An identity, even if it's totally dysfunctional, gives you the payoff of knowing who you are. You see, we find it very confusing, very eerie, very difficult, very disorienting, and maybe even dissatisfying or demotivating to not know who we are. So the moment somebody offers you an identity which confirms some of the traits that you have, even if they are dysfunctional traits, not only does it have the payoff of being understood, but it has the payoff of no longer needing to contend with the existential void that is pervasive when you are not knowing who you are, when you are still seeking yourself. So the self-seeking is supposedly pacified. Now, I've made videos about imposter syndrome before to explain that this is not an effective way of dealing with this. You're simply kidding yourself, or we are simply kidding ourselves. But nevertheless, for the thinking mind, this seems to satisfy, so we will cling to that identity. So this is a very short video on the drawbacks of identity, the specific drawbacks of having the identity or clinging to the identity of being an empath, which places you in a mental entanglement with its opposite, which might be an asshole or a narcissist, and how pervasive this phenomenon is how it is something that we need to find ways to outgrow, which I've also mentioned in my previous video about codependence being a sort of autoimmune disease. And so with this one, I will close off the video, but I will continue with this line in some future clips. And as usual, if you think that this is valuable content, then sharing your ideas on the comment section, liking, sharing, and subscribing the video makes it also more available to others who can benefit from this kind of information. And as usual, I'll be back with more pretty soon. And until then, cheerio and thanks for listening. Bye-bye.